Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Huddle Up Live. I am Mark Duncan. I am the fund coach, and I'm so delighted to be here with you. I know this is a Thursday afternoon. We're in early February, um, and it's cold outside. For those of you watching on the East Coast, it's a little chilly here, but I'm so excited. I'm so excited today because I have a special guest who I will bring on momentarily, who is here to talk about donor advised funds. Now, some of you may be watching this and saying, what is that? Right? Especially if you're a nonprofit leader, you've heard the term, but maybe you don't fully understand it. I guarantee you that by the end of this live, you will know not only exactly what a donor advised fund is, but how a donor advised fund can play into your overall fundraising strategy for your organization. What I'd like to do is bring on my guest. Her name is Alex Del Colo, and she is from Diamond State Financial Group, and she is here to talk about donor advised funds. And so let's welcome Alex to the program. Alex, welcome to Huddle Up Live.
Thanks, Mark. It's good to see you again, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm very excited to talk about these donor advised funds. I have a love-hate relationship with them, but and I'll explain why. But first, I'll just give everybody a little bit of background on myself. I am a financial advisor with Diamond State Financial Group, and we are the largest firm in the state of Delaware. I have worked with and for nonprofits for over 10 years prior to becoming a financial advisor. And then once I found myself in this role, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, right? Because
Right.
once you work with nonprofits, it's like you can never leave, right?
Yep.
And so I knew that I wanted to continue to work with nonprofits and help continue to support their mission in serving their communities. So that's one of the areas that I chose to specialize in here at Diamond State.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm so glad that you're here because what we're going to be talking about today it can be a mystery, right? Some of us have been in the nonprofit space for a long time. I remember, way back when I started in the nonprofit space, especially in the fundraising space, which is like the late 90s, which is ancient history. I would hear about donor advised funds or, sometimes you would hear some bad things, right? I remember I had a boss who said, we never, ever, ever, ever want to deal with donor advised funds. And I was so scared. I didn't even ask what they were. Number one, and number two, why, right? So
Yeah.
excited to do this. I'm excited to bring this information to those who are either watching this live or who will see this on the replay. So without any further ado, Alex, can you explain in layman's terms what is a donor advised fund?
Very, very simply, it's a charitable gifting vehicle.
Okay.
Okay. That's as simple as I can put it. But let me go a little bit further into that.
Yes.
It is specifically meant as an account that an individual can open up, put funds into, get a tax donation for those funds that they contribute into that account. And then they can make or advise grants to be made on their behalf out of that fund to a 501c3 organization. So there's some other caveats behind that, but at very, very layman's terms, that's what it is.
All right. So thank you for that, because that's so any person, just to get some clarity here, who wants to give to a nonprofit organization, but can create one of these funds, and they can direct those funds to one or more nonprofit organization. So tell me why someone would do this as opposed to just giving directly. What are the benefits of using a donor advised fund for charitable giving?
One of the major benefits of a donor advised fund compared to the other numerous charitable giving vehicles, which we won't talk about today, but is the fact that the donor, once that account is opened, the funds in that account, that donor still has some control over that account. And so the gift is not given right away to the organizations that the donor wants to direct those funds to. The donor can take their time to think about the organizations they want to utilize. Their funds can also continue to grow in this account, which is really powerful when we talk about donors that care about leaving a legacy, because the fund itself can literally outlast the donor.
Interesting. So when you say that, and I've got my nonprofit leader hat on here, is there a strategy that a nonprofit leader can employ, given what you just said, about the fund outliving, right, the donor, in terms of how the nonprofit organization can benefit from that post the donor's life?
When a donor advised fund is set up, it is actually set up at a grant-making public charity, which is considered the sponsor of the fund. And so that sponsor is a 501c3.
Okay.
A couple of things happen during the account setup process that tell the fund what's going to happen once the donor passes away. So one of three things can happen. And I specifically, with one of the sponsors that I work with here, they can become the beneficiary of the fund themselves, meaning that they take on that fund into their own pool of funds to then continue grant making through whatever sponsors and scholarships and programs that they have as the grant making body.
Okay. And this is the entity that is sponsoring the actual donor advised fund, the nonprofit.
Correct. Where the fund is actually held.
Where it's housed. Okay. Got it.
So that's the first thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is the donor can choose other 501c3 organizations to become the beneficiary or beneficiaries of whatever remains in the fund once they pass. The final thing that could happen is that the donor actually designates somebody to take over once they pass. And then that person continues to advise on that fund on their behalf.
So almost like an executor of an estate, that's the person that would be assigned on behalf of. Okay. So you talked a little bit about this, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. Thank you for answering that question. Let's talk about how one can set up a donor advised fund. So I'm somebody who is charitable minded. I have a lump sum of money, and I'm interested in setting up one of these funds. Walk us through how you do that.
It's actually quite an easy process. So if you have a financial advisor that you're working with, I do this all the time. I do all the paperwork and set up the account on the behalf of our clients. And for them, it's very quick and easy process, like setting up any other account. There's just a tweak in paperwork involved, right? The caveat, though, is where the money is being held. The sponsor may have a minimum of the amount of initial funds that need to go in and be contributed.
Okay.
That can, again, it depends on where it is. It could be as low as zero. The organization that I work with most has a minimum of $100,000.
Okay.
So that really is the only barrier for a lot of folks, and not knowing that they have access to these types of charitable vehicles. If you don't work with somebody like myself, then you can go directly to a community foundation. There are a ton of them. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but you can go directly to your local community foundation and they have guidelines, minimums, or what have you to set up the donor advised fund, and they will walk you through that process as well.
And can donor advised funds receive gifts themselves? So if someone first, you mentioned that $100,000 threshold, right? And that's not unusual. What you've just, when you were talking about this, I've worked in higher ed for quite a while. We have a minimum threshold, or we had a minimum threshold. I don't work there anymore, of $25,000 to establish an endowment, right? So if somebody wanted to establish an endowment for scholarships or anything like that, they could start one of those endowments for a minimum of $25,000. So it sounds like it's pretty similar for the donor advised fund. But let's say I don't have $100,000. Maybe I have $25,000. Can I give to an existing donor advised fund? And is that something you see happen with folks that you work with? It's an odd question, but I wanted to put that out there because
that's a very interesting question. That is not something I have come across previously. I would say that if one of my clients came to me and said, I want to give, but I only have $25,000, and I know that the threshold for the organization that I work with most is $100,000, then maybe we look for somewhere that has a lower threshold.
Okay.
Because if that's truly what they want to do, the client's the driver, right?
Absolutely.
But I might introduce some of these other charitable vehicles as well to see if something else piques their interest too. Because at the end of the day, there's two things that's happening here. The donor wants to be philanthropic,
right,
but there's also tax deduction implications that happen here too.
Right.
So I'm always balancing these things and trying to understand, one, what's in the best interest of the client, and two, what does the client want?
Right.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It
Okay.
does. So let me get good, because I have a lot of questions for you, which I doubt we'll get to all of them. But talk to me. We talked about cash. Are there other types of assets? Hold on a second. Are there other types of assets that can be donated to a donor advised fund, or are we just talking about cash?
What a fabulous question. And honestly, cash is the most inefficient way to give.
Huh.
And the reason for that is actually due to the tax implications. So one of the most efficient ways to give is through something that has increased in value. Cash historically does not increase in value, right? But you can give cash.
Okay.
You can give any type of securities, meaning stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, those types of things. Believe it or not, you can, depending on the sponsor that you're working with, you can give real estate, cryptocurrency, cars, sometimes art. And the sponsor itself actually works with the donor to transfer the asset into something that the donor advised fund can hold. But the tax the tax deductions change depending on the type of asset you're donating. So I always encourage donors to work with their accountants and understand fully what those are. And I work very closely with their accountant as well. But that sponsor will take those donations. They will be evaluated so that an amount, an evaluation can be made, and then the tax deduction being taken from there actually gets put into the fund at that point after it's sold off or what have you by the sponsor itself.
Okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, if I'm a person who has inherited a home. And so I inherit that home. I can actually use that home to establish a donor advised fund. Is that correct?
Technically, yes.
Wow. Wow.
But you would
Uh,
no longer own that home.
understood.
All right. So I just
Understood.
need to be clear. Anything put into that donor advised fund is no longer yours.
Right. Right. No, I understand that. So I'm not interested in selling the home. I want to do something good with it. And
Yep.
so I can use that to establish a donor advised fund.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Um, can we talk about how, and then I want to shift into some questions that really will benefit nonprofit leaders, but I do want to have an understanding of how they're invested. Talk to me about how donor advised funds are invested. I'm assuming they're very similar to perhaps to endowments, but tell me more about that.
Donor advised funds have the ability to be invested like literally any other account. The only limiting factor is what investments are available by the sponsor.
Okay.
So they can be invested in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, anything that sponsor allows through their specific platform. The platform that I use, the sponsor that I use most frequently, I have access to help my donors invest their accounts in the exact same things that they would invest in any other account they have.
Okay.
So there's a lot of flexibility here.
Okay.
The piece that I like to pay most attention to when I'm helping my donors figure out, because the donor's advising on what to invest in, I like to help them figure out what the goal of the fund is. Because if they want to give, say, in the next year,
Mm-hmm.
then they should probably keep some cash in that account so that the value doesn't go down for the funds that they want to give really soon.
Okay.
If they have funds they want to give 5, 6, 7 years from now, we can invest those much more aggressively so that account value is growing and essentially the donor can do more because it's able to grow.
Okay. Got it. So from a nonprofit leader's perspective, what is some advice that you could give to nonprofit organizations when they are approached by or are having conversations with donors and then they discover that they have a donor advisement? This has actually happened to me, right? Where I was in conversation with a prospective donor. I wanted to make a 5-figure gift ask to support a project. I did that. And then all of a sudden, I discovered that we'd have to work through this process, right, to be able to have those funds released to the organization I was working for. So talk a little bit about that. What can a nonprofit leader expect when they bump up against this? And how would you advise them as it relates to working with that donor?
I am most familiar with the donor side. I'm going to be honest with you. And I think that says a lot about the amount of work that we have to do on the nonprofit side, right? Because many of the organizations that I work with are getting funds and they have no idea where they're coming from
Mm-hmm.
because donor advised distributions can be anonymous.
Right.
Okay, so that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, if you are engaging in a donor that you know has one of these, then, man, I feel like you've hit the jackpot.
Right. Right.
That's something all nonprofits want to be able to achieve.
Yeah.
And you're going to love me for saying this. You do that by building relationships and knowing your donors.
Absolutely.
And and you want to be at the forefront of their mind when they are looking to give these gifts, right? When a donor makes a recommendation on a grant to the sponsors, believe it or not, have a list of nonprofits that are already approved.
Right.
And if you're not on that list, they do a due diligence process and check to make sure that they're being good fiduciaries, essentially, of those funds. So that process can be a little exhausting, to your point.
Right. Right. So let's talk about that for a second, because I want nonprofit leaders to really hear that there's some work that they can do ahead of time to position themselves so that they are on a list. So let's take a community foundation, for example, where there may be a number of donor advised funds. Having a relationship there would be beneficial, so that you become a known entity, so that when that person who owns the donor advised fund or who's established it is having a conversation with leadership, may say, hey, you may want to think about this organization, right? Or that, or whatever that may be. Okay, so that's great. And so, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of relationships, because that's exactly what happened with the person that, and I won't name names, but that's exactly what happened with the person that I was working with. We're having a conversation about a particular project. They were excited about the project. We had this series of conversations. It was establishing rapport, building relationships. And then when it came time to ask, the person said yes. And then I discovered they had a donor advised fund. And then here's what happened next. After we got the big gift for the project, of course, I continued to maintain that relationship. And I didn't even ask at one of our next visits and say, hey, I'm gonna free up another 10 grand from our fund. So expect a call from, there was a process, right? But it was done, right? And the money came into, and I didn't even ask for it. So that emphasizes the importance of the relationship piece. It also emphasizes the philanthropic mindset that people who have donor advised funds have, right? And so when you stumble upon this, it's a good thing. So that's some good stuff. Alex, I want you to tell me, right? Because you have this love-hate relationship with these. So let's go down your list of the pros and cons of donor advised funds.
Well, pros, in my opinion, are a lot on the donor side,
Okay.
a lot less on the nonprofit side, because of the way they're being utilized right now.
Okay. Talk about that.
So if you're familiar with private foundations, then you know private foundations have a mandate 5% distribution of their net assets annually. Donor advised funds do not have that.
Okay.
As of 2022, there are $228.89 billion with a B dollars in donor advised funds.
Okay. So Alex, for the people in the back, can you please repeat that number? I know where people watch this on the replay. I get it. But can you say that number again?
$228.89 billion.
Wow.
Can you imagine what our nonprofit community could do if they had that amount of money in their hands in the community? Can you imagine?
Yes, I can. I can. As somebody who's been in this space for a long time, I can. As somebody who works with nonprofit leaders, I can. Why is this, Alex? Why? I that's a lot of money that could be doing a lot of good, especially right now. So talk about that.
I think that donors truly want to do good with their money. I truly believe that. But I'm going to just do a quick shout out to the control freaks,
Okay.
who can't let go sometimes or that can't make up their mind on where they want to give or how they want to give. And these donor advised funds keep kicking the can down the road. And the donors have already gotten their tax deductions. And so that is where this love-hate relationship comes from, because at no point do I want to stifle donors from giving, but we have to get the money into the hands of the organizations that are doing the work. And I'm sorry, these funds sitting in, yes, a 501c3, but a multi-million-dollar 501c3 is not getting the work done.
Right.
It's just not.
Right.
And that's why I have these mixed emotions about this type of fund.
Yeah. So what can be done here, right? So is it a matter of getting in front of these folks who have donor advised funds and sort of emphasizing the fact that they're sitting on resources that can provide wonderful increase in services and resources and all of those things to help people that are being served by these organizations? I'm having trouble understanding what would hold somebody back. You create the donor advised fund for the purpose of being philanthropic, and then there's some paralysis by analysis here. I don't know, right?
I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I wish. I mean, and here I will say that in the same time we have this amount of money that is sitting in these donor advised funds, there are grants being given. They're just not mandated like the private foundations are.
Right.
I don't like to say, oh, well, we need a new policy. We need to do, don't love that.
Yeah, I agree.
But what I think that each of us can do, and myself included, my fellow advisors included, is engaging donors in a different way, making sure that we are really advising donors on nonprofits on how you want them to give to you, explaining how they can give to you, and really move away from this cash thing.
Yeah.
Everyone accepts cash.
Yeah.
But as a donation, of course, you're not going to stop accepting cash. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that you have to present your donors with the other alternatives. I mean, just a real quick list, right? Yes. Okay. Donor advised funds. Got it. Yes. Okay. Private foundations. Got it. Charitable remainder trusts, charitable lead trusts, charitable gift annuities, direct gifts, qualified charitable distributions, and other planned giving vehicles like being a beneficiary on a 401k, life insurance policy. Those, I don't love the life insurance policy thing because it's already tax-free money. So let's do the taxable inheritable things, but and leave the tax-free stuff to the families. But all of these things you can be beneficiaries on. Yeah. And educating those donors about that is huge.
And so let me speak to that for a moment, because I know that in the nonprofit space, if you're a nonprofit leader, you're working for a small to mid-sized organization, let's say your fiscal year, is a January to December fiscal year, and you're just mired in the day-to-day. You're trying to you're in survival mode. Yeah. And so cash is king, and cash now is even better. And so, and that's great. To Alex's point, you're not going to turn down cash. But if you're a nonprofit leader and you're listening to this and you want your organization to be around 25, 30, 50 years from now, then you've got to put things in place that will ensure that happens. And so providing your donors with the opportunity to support your organization in a variety of ways, that will not only help the present, but will help ensure the future is critical, right? Higher ed knows how to do this. Hospitals know how to do this. I'm not seeing this happen as a standard operating procedure in the sort of typical social services nonprofit space. And I get it. I can sit here and say this, um, and you could be looking at me going, "Okay, we don't have time. We're literally hand to mouth trying to serve the people that we serve." I get that, but a little bit at a time, just one future focused opportunity for people to support your organization can go a long, long way. So, Alex, thank you for saying that, and mentioning particularly all those other planned giving opportunities. That's a whole nother conversation entirely, right? Um, we are so focused in the now and literally the moment, we can lose sight of what we can really do to ensure the longevity of an organization. As we move forward. Okay, so did you finish your list of pros and cons? Did we?
I think that was good enough for
Okay,
today. Yeah.
all right. So, and I just have a couple more questions for you, and then you've got an event coming up, and
Yeah.
so I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that. Um, but are there any limitations or regulations surrounding how you kind of alluded to this, but how donor advised funds can be distributed to charitable organizations? Is there anything that they can't do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are legal limitations. IRS outlined limitations to these. So the first one, and I mentioned it earlier, was that the funds have to go to a 501c3. So there are a lot of different types of nonprofit organizations, but specifically 501c3s only. So
Okay.
that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second is that the funds cannot be earmarked for a specifically designated individual. And to work off of that, the donor and any family members of the donor cannot directly or indirectly benefit from the grant.
Okay.
And so you're probably thinking like, okay, what does that mean? Think about scholarships.
Oh yeah.
Right? So that's a perfect example of those last two that could get really dicey and complex.
Yeah.
But that's really the main 3 points.
So not uncommon with any other best practices around giving and who receives those gifts. You'd be surprised though at how many people try to circumvent and provide earmark a scholarship to a particular individual. This is why
people get real creative.
They do, and this is why if an organization is worth its salt, especially in higher education, you've got a separate group, separate body who's making those decisions, following the guidelines of the donor, right? But that's it. The donor has no say in where those dollars go, as long as they meet the criteria that the donor established, and that's what's important. Okay, so I want to thank you for being with me. Talk about this event that's coming up, which I think I may be there too. Talk about.
I'm so excited. This is our first annual nonprofit symposium, and I know you're going to love the name. We're calling it the nonprofit F words.
Nice.
Fundraising, finance, and future. All the things that are so hard, one, to do, and two, to think about. To your point, when we're so engrossed in the day-to-day of meeting our mission and just surviving, but it's so important for us to make sure that we're focusing on these things for that longevity, for that, I'm going to say it, you're going to hate it, sustainability. Alex, what does that mean?
Right.
I know, it's a very vague word, but you get what I'm getting at. We have to focus on these things in order for our nonprofit partners to last and continue to have an impact on our local communities. So a couple of things. We'll have you're speaking, right?
I'll be there. Looking forward to it.
Specifically on relationship fundraising. I'm very excited.
Very, very excited to be there.
We have another speaker that's going to talk about planned giving. Probably going to go through lots of the giving vehicles that I mentioned today. We have another partner that is going to go through bridging the gap between development and finance. So talking about bringing in those funds, but then also planning on utilizing those funds, not just in the year they get them, but how you spread that out and make them last. And then lastly, we're going to talk about important policies that you need to have in place when we're talking about bringing in different types of gifts, how we use the unrestricted funds, things like that. What type of gifts we even are allowed to bring in. If we're investing our funds, what are those policies and how do we formulate those? Various things like that. So I'm super pumped about it. It is going to be on March 14th, 2024.
Got it.
We're going to start at noon. And since we have 4 speakers, we'll probably go to around 4:45. But super excited because we're going to do a happy hour afterwards in which everyone who hangs out with us and networks with us and the other nonprofits there are going to be entered into a chance to, well, what's one of the things that we talked about?
Working with me, an opportunity to work with me. So I'm excited. I'm excited to one, be participating in this, presenting at this, and also giving people a chance to get some coaching and learn how to do this. So this is great. I you can see at the bottom of the screen, I put the name of the symposium. It's Nonprofit Symposium, Fundraising, Finance, and Future, the F words, right, of this. March 14th, 2024. Where's this going to be, Alex?
Great question. I did also want to mention, though, if you stick around for the networking meeting, not only networking portion, not only do they get a chance to work with you, but they will also get an opportunity to be drawn for a cash donation to their 501c3 because we know it's so important.
That's great.
That they come to this, but they're taking a time out of their day to do this. So I do want to mention that.
That's fantastic. If anybody can see, in the chat, I dropped the link for you to register for this symposium. So feel free to grab that, and it's here in Delaware. So for those of you maybe watching around the country, it will be here in Delaware on March 14th. We'd love to. You want to travel by all means. You will get something out of this that I think will be beneficial to you, and I'm excited to be a part of it as well. So, Alex, thank you so much for your time today, your wisdom, your advice, your counsel, your expertise,
my passion around these things, right?
Especially when we started talking about those things that kind of make you crazy about this. But at the end of the day, right, it's all about wanting the right things to happen, so that the people that are being served can benefit from this generosity. And so donor advised funds are a way to make sure that can happen. And thank you for being on the show today to talk about donor advised funds and to provide that background. And hopefully some of you will be able to join us for the symposium on March 14th. And other than that, I want to thank everybody for whether you're watching this live or watching it on a replay. I hope this was helpful to you. Alex, thank you so much for being here. It has been a pleasure. I'm looking at March. And I want to thank everybody for joining us for another Huddle Up Live. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, this whole thing about fundraising is not about the dollars. It's about what the dollars do for the people that we serve. Thank you, and